Welcome to the Essential Self-Care Podcast, a show for those of us who are, let's face it, too busy for self-care. Each week, we bring you real-life stories and expert insights to help you create a kinder, more compassionate relationship with yourself. I'm your host, Dr. Sheetal Ajmani, a physician with over 2 decades of experience blending Eastern and Western well-being practices. As the founder of Radiant Living Institute, I'm here to help you reconnect with your own inner radiance. Remember, small changes make a large impact, and it all starts here. Please note, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always consult your own healthcare provider about your specific situation. Now, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Essential Self-Care Podcast. Thank you for joining me here today for a solocast episode of the show, where we're going to talk about some reflections from the past year. So specifically your reflections from the past year, not mine, but I'm going to guide you through this. So every year around this time of year, I do a sort of past year review and New Year's visioning process. And you may be familiar, there's so many different types of processes like this out there. But I want to share with you a little piece of my process. And if you want the full workshop and the full workbook, you can definitely access that on my website, radiantlivinginstitute.com, under courses. And I'll include the link to that in the show notes below. But for today, I want to give you not only a sneak preview of one part of that process. There's actually 4 steps in the visioning process that I use, and I created it myself. So I took a look at, there's so many different sort of like year in review and New Year's visioning processes within the personal development world that lots of different thought leaders have come up with. But I created my own spin on it and my own take on it. And today I'm just going to go over a bit of the first part of it, which is the past year review. So, when we're looking at the new upcoming year, and let's face it, at the time that this episode is being released, you might not even be thinking about the new year. You might just be trying to get through the holidays. And that is completely, totally valid. Although most years I do this process around this time of year, sometimes it does go into January. So don't feel bad, and don't make yourself feel guilty about it if you're listening to this in January or February of 2025 and you haven't gone through a process like this. It's never too late to start. And really, the new year is just like a sort of milestone on the calendar to do this, but you can really do this any time of year. In fact, I ask myself the types of questions that I'm going to share with you today on a pretty regular basis. I go through a process like this certainly every year, but also some form of it every quarter and every month. So you can really do this anytime. The new year is just sort of like a milestone and a date on the calendar to do it, but really you can do it any time of year. And the reason I'm bringing it up for you today is because I just had a holiday party for the 2 groups that I launched and created and have been facilitating this year. So if you're not aware, I have been facilitating 2 groups this year. One has been a group coaching and peer support circle for female entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and small business owners. And then the other has been a similar group, a group coaching and peer support circle for women in executive and leadership positions. And both of these groups have been running in person where I'm located in Hampton Roads, Virginia, for this year. And I did a joint holiday party just last week as of the release of this episode. And it was so much fun. And while I could have just done, a celebration and a party, I really wanted to do intentional exercises and activities where we could really think about and reflect upon our successes and our celebrations from the year, because The thing is, so there's a few reasons why. One of the reasons why is that it's so easy to focus on the negative, to focus on all that we have not accomplished. And especially this time of year, if you are listening to it, around the time that this episode is released, which is right around the holiday season, you could just be thinking about just all that you have to do before year end, both within business, within, the holidays, for your family. There's just so much that could be going on in your mind right now. And so it's so easy to think about all that is left to do, or all that you didn't get to or didn't accomplish, or all of the ways that this year didn't turn out the way that you wanted it to. But it takes more training and intentional cultivation of focusing on all that went well this year. And so this is not to eliminate or diminish or make void any of your challenges from this year. It is simply a way to look at all that you have overcome, to look at all of your successes, things that maybe you do not keep at the forefront of your mind most likely because of this thing called negativity bias, where our mind tends to focus on either the negative or the lack. And that happens naturally. There's an evolutionary basis to that our human minds tends to focus on that. And so it does take an intentional cultivation of noticing the good around us, noticing the good within us, noticing the good within our lives. And so that's what this is all about. And there's a few other reasons that I'd mentioned at the holiday party last week. So I'm giving you a sneak peek of that if you weren't there. And specifically those groups that I facilitate are for women. And, we know that as women, we tend to not toot our own horns very often, actually, right? We tend to, I give a keynote about addressing imposter syndrome. And in that, I talk about how one of the features of imposter syndrome is that we tend to downplay our successes, right? Imposter syndrome, if you're not familiar, tends to actually affect high achieving individuals the most. It tends to affect people who are more in sort of high stakes careers and professions, who it uh, tends to favor and affect women and minority groups more as well. And one of the things that we see with imposter syndrome is not accepting or giving ourselves credit for our successes and our achievements. So have you ever been given a compliment? Has someone ever commended your work and you've said, oh, the stars must have been aligned that day, right? Or, oh, I'm just so blessed, right? But basically attributing it to something outside of yourself, or attributing it to luck, right? And so, one way I talk about addressing imposter syndrome, about learning to live with it, because I don't think it's something that ever truly goes away completely, because we're, as humans, continually evolving and growing and leveling up, you could say, in our lives, both professionally and personally. And so we're continually being put in or putting ourselves in new situations that can sometimes, test our comfort zones. And with anything like that, features and symptoms of imposter syndrome can come up, of not feeling qualified, of not feeling ready. Right. And of not noticing our own accomplishments. And so through reflecting on some of the questions that I'm going to present to you in today's episode, it gives you an opportunity to sort of build that muscle of noticing what is good, of giving yourself some credit for that. And, all of that can help lead to an increase in confidence as well, as you begin to move forward into this next season or next phase of your life. whether that's the next calendar year or another sort of marker or milestone that you have for this next phase or season of your life. And so that was one of the reasons that I had this activity as part of the holiday celebration. And then, as part of the exercise, I had the women in my group who attended the holiday party. I had them pair off to answer these questions so that one person was sharing their celebrations and the other person was listening. And then, of course, they would switch off. And so I asked the person who was listening to also provide some sort of validation to the person who was sharing, right? Because another thing that we have found, particularly as women in general, of not accepting compliments very well, right? Again, of attributing these sort of successes to something outside of ourselves, right? And so learning how to accept compliments is also a skill, to graciously accept compliments, right? And to allow ourselves to begin to internalize some of that success, right? And this can lead us to continue to achieve more, to support each other, to uplift each other, and to build that confidence as we move about in other aspects of our lives. And so, if you have a group or some friends who you can do this exercise with, I encourage you to do so. If you don't, I still encourage you to think about these questions, right? So whatever that looks like for you, maybe for you that means just listening to this episode and reflecting on the questions as I say them out loud. Maybe it means grabbing a journal and jotting down, really taking some time with it and jotting down your answers to each of these questions, and knowing that you can always come back to this at any time. And of course, if you want a deeper dive, these are the sorts of questions that I also ask and that you're given an opportunity to reflect on, that I guide you through in my Create Your Radiant Year workshop and workbook that you can find on my website at radiantlivinginstitute.com. Before we go on, I'm excited to share something that could really make a positive impact on your life. Want to design a life that truly aligns with your values, no matter what time of year it is? Create Your Radiant Year will show you how to make your goals feel meaningful and achievable. This transformative workshop will guide you in designing a life aligned with your values without relying on rigid resolutions. You'll learn a powerful, adaptable method to confidently pursue your dreams, no matter where life takes you. It's not about what you do, but who you become. Head over to radiantlivinginstitute.com to access this workshop and create your radiant year today. I hope you found that helpful. If you are ready to explore this more, check out the link in the show notes below. Now, let's jump back into today's episode. There's 5 questions that I want you to just to think about. So the first one is what's one thing you can feel proud of from this year? And there can be more than one thing. I just ask you to and invite you to start with thinking of one thing, because for many of us, if we're not used to thinking about these sort of questions, sometimes it can be hard to get started. So if you find that happening for you, just know that that's okay. This sort of process really does take some practice and training of it. And so, just what's one thing that you can feel proud of from this year? And I always like to say there's nothing too small or too big to like mention or think of or to list here or to jot down in your journal. There really is nothing too big or too small to include here, right? What's one thing you can feel proud of from this year? It could be something professional. It could be something in your personal life. It could be something that you did this year related to getting healthier in your body, mind, emotions, spirit. It could be, having picked up a new hobby this year. It could be having set boundaries, really difficult boundaries this year. What's one thing you can feel proud of? And then after you've taken the time to reflect on that or to jot that down, I invite you to share or think about a personal celebration. What's one thing from your personal life that you can celebrate from this year? Again, there is nothing too big or too small. What is a personal celebration or a personal milestone that you can take a moment here to celebrate, to acknowledge, to feel gratitude for? What's one personal celebration? Now, of course, you can write more down in your journal, or you can think about more. And often once you start this process, more will come to you, whether in this moment or later in the day or later this week, which is really one of the beautiful aspects of going through processes like this. And then the next question I have for you is, what is a professional milestone that you achieved this year? So maybe it's in your job or your career, or maybe it's in your business. Maybe it's that you started a new business. Maybe it is that you got a promotion. Maybe it's that you set better boundaries at work, and that's a professional milestone. Maybe it's that you completed and achieved a project that you've been working on for a good portion of the year, right? What is a professional milestone that you achieved? Maybe you got a new certification in something that you've been wanting to dive deeper into for a while now. So what is a professional milestone that you achieved this year? And then the next question is, what was a pleasant surprise from this year? What was a pleasant surprise? So we all know that life rarely goes exactly how we planned it, right? As much as we want to, right? I am one of the biggest planners, out of the rest of them. As I know, many of my listeners are, many of my clients are big planners. And so it can be really hard when we realize that life rarely goes as we plan it to. And so often we think about that in the sense of when things go, in a way that we didn't expect, that feels negative, quote unquote negative, or as an obstacle or a challenge. But the other side of that holds true too. There's so much that goes unplanned, that we don't plan for, that we don't account for, that is just such beautiful, pleasant surprises, right? And so what's one of those that happened this year? What's a pleasant surprise that happened this year? Maybe you bought a house and you weren't expecting to buy one this year, but just the perfect house came on the market, right? Maybe you met someone, a new significant other. Maybe you made some new friends just through hanging out in different communities and attending different events than you usually do. And now you've just gotten this beautiful new circle of friends, right? What's a pleasant surprise for you this year? Maybe you picked up a new hobby that's been kind of on your mind for a while, and just, everything aligned perfectly with your schedule and finances, that you were able to pick it up this year as a new hobby. And so what was a pleasant surprise this year? And maybe there's more than one. Go ahead and jot those down or think about those now. And then the final question I have for you for today's episode to reflect upon, is, what can you feel grateful for in this moment? What can you feel grateful for in this moment? Now, if you're listening to this episode right as it's released, as I mentioned, we are in the middle of the holiday season. And so there might be so much going on. I know so many of my friends, my family members, clients, and colleagues are feeling quite overwhelmed this time of year, with the holidays upon us, and with coming on to, trying to meet year-end goals as well. And so it can be easy to lose sight of all that we can feel grateful for. So what can you feel grateful for in this moment? Your family, your friends, shelter, food, being able to go out for walks. What can you feel grateful for? Your job, your career, right? What can you feel grateful for in this moment? So I'm curious, those are the questions that I presented at the holiday party this year. As I mentioned, I have a deeper dive of sort of the past year review, and then leading that into a sort of visioning process for the new year, the new phase, the new season of your life. Like I said, you can really do it any time of year. But the new year, the new calendar year, just sort of marks a milestone, uh, where it can be kind of nice to engage in a process, in a more in-depth process like this. But know that, if you're listening to this and it's well past the new year, that it's not too late. You can always do this process. And my process, this visioning process, is really focused on who you are and who you want to become in this new season of your life, right? So it's very different than a lot of the other visioning processes out there that are very much focused on the specific goals that you're trying to meet. I really, through this process and approach, take it a step further to really examining why. Why do you want to achieve those goals, right? And so much of the time, the reason behind that why is related to who we want to become, how we want to show up in our lives, what our values are, what our priorities are. And we are seeking ways in our external life through those external goals to validate the who and the how, and to step more fully into that version of ourselves that feels most aligned and authentic. So I encourage you to check that out. And if you went through and really, took some time to reflect on these questions today that I shared with you, I would love to hear from you. I always love to hear your insights and your reflections from these podcast episodes. So please share them with me. You can visit radiantlivinginstitute.com and use the contact page to send me a message. You can also find me on LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm most active on those in terms of social media sites. So you can, send me a message directly through those avenues as well to share your insights with me. I look forward to hearing from you. I know you have so many choices for how to spend your time. So I thank you for being here today with Essential Self-Care. As a gift, download your free workbook, 6 simple yet powerful steps to create your radiant life at radiantlivinginstitute.com and start your journey to a more radiant you.